Hey everyone, Anark here, and this is another episode of Anark Abridged, where I just sit down for maybe 20-30 minutes and talk to the camera for a little while. If you're interested in the work that I'm doing on this channel, you should go over and look at some of the other videos that I've created. I've got a lot more of these Anark Abridged videos, and I've also got these much longer video essays on all kinds of interesting philosophical and political theory topics, especially regarding anarchism and libertarian socialism and all kinds of things relating to that. So if that interests you, you should go take a look. And if you're a returning viewer, you should go down and give this video a like. You should subscribe to the channel if you've been watching numerous videos that I've produced, and maybe go down and leave a comment. You know, all that engagement really helps the channel grow. There's a reason why every YouTuber, starts their videos out with that information. It's all really important. Lastly, if you enjoy the work that's being done on this channel, if you want to help this channel grow, then you should go over to my Patreon, patreon.com/Anark, A-N-A-R-K, and become a patron for any amount. Everything helps. But with that, let's get on to the topic of the video, and that is aesthetics as radicalism. Or maybe said otherwise, aesthetics instead of radicalism. So let's talk about that. So right off the bat, what do I mean by aesthetics as radicalism or aesthetics in place of radicalism? Well, what I'm referring to is basically that there is this tendency in the modern day, and I think there's a lot of things that go into it, and we'll talk about it, for people to confuse having a particular aesthetic or applying a particular label to themselves as a revolutionary or a radical act in and of itself, to the degree that that act sort of replaces their need to actually do anything in the real world, or that it's sort of like soothes them for having not done anything in the real world, or having not really changed anything in the real world. I mean, I'll give you more perhaps examples of what I mean. There are these people, I think we're all familiar with them, where they change their ideology like 15 times in the course of just a few years. Sometimes this is called like, ideology shopping. And this is just a really common thing in the modern era, where you have somebody that believes one ideological perspective one day, and then a few weeks later, just some stray argument they read on Twitter or heard in a Discord or something, like just changes their mind completely, and now there's some radically different ideology. And the reason I think this takes place is because we live in a society where people feel very disempowered. In the past, you would have had some body wherein you could have derived power. That is to say, you could have joined like a radical union or some sort of a cooperative or a commune that was near you. You could become active in some like powerful, worker organization that had been developed for a very long time, that had a history of decades and had intertwined itself with all kinds of different types of power structures within the society it was in, and so on. There were real platforms for struggle within your life that made a difference, where people could really see the outcomes of their actions, where they could see that, that action, that got me a higher wage. That action, that got us sick days. That action, that got us, more leisure time, more vacation, and so on, right? Like there was real tangible benefits to being part of many of these organizations. And furthermore, those organizations had real clear power to act in the world. And so much of the time, people were choosing their ideology in relation to which of those they thought were succeeding, and which of those they were embedded in and related to, and which of those surrounded them. And furthermore, these ideologies had like examples to point to where they were really making a difference in the world, and where there was a major organization which existed, or there was a history of struggle and like martyrs and so on. And I think we live in a time now where so many of those bodies have either been just out and out destroyed by the state and capital, or they've been co-opted. Take, for example, the biggest labor unions. And this leaves people with no feeling of solidity and no grounding in a struggle that they can see really producing gains for them. And, this is kind of across the board, right? Like this is for all kinds of different sectors of society. Almost all of these different sectors of society now lack these radical, militant bodies for struggle that actually make progress, make gains, that succeed and win at the things that they set out to do. So people instead turn to the label they put on themselves, to the aesthetic and the lifestyle that they choose to live, the way they choose to dress, the radical ideology that they subscribe to, and it leads to this thing where they think that the ideology itself is powerful. Like having the ideology, labeling oneself with the ideology is the radical act. And this is not only, I believe, because of the wide-scale destruction of many of these radical bodies for struggle. It is also because we are now so, embedded in the internet. And on the internet, we don't really have direct control over most of the environment that we're in. When you're on Twitter or something, you don't get to control how Twitter works. You don't get to change the code. You don't get to be part of that. It doesn't matter what kind of direct action you take. They're probably not going to change it. And even if it were, what would really happen for you? Would that improve your wages? Would that, increase the number of days that you didn't have to labor? Would that, help your family out of poverty? Would that cure your sister's addiction and so on? And the answer is no, right? So what we do is we end up spending all of our time very concerned with who has the right line, who's got the exact perfect ideology and has everything in order. And, they have the right ideas on everything. And this having the right ideas becomes the most important struggle for people. They spend all their time worrying about whether they have the right ideas and whether their label is radical enough. And I think this leads to a sort of false understanding of what radicalism is. When you have no real power in the world and all that your power, the only thing that makes you feel powerful is that label you put on yourself and is the ideas that you promulgate into society. And I just want to, note that this is not to say those things don't have value and that you shouldn't do those things. This is that's not what this is about. But when that's all you have, what it becomes is it's sort of like a game to see how extreme you can sound, right? Not like radicalism, this word radical relates to roots. And so it's generally conceived that being a radical is going to the foundations. However, what you see is a lot of people that are confusing having a very extreme aesthetic or a very militant orientation as being radical because it's extreme. They've confused extremism for radicalism. And I think that's a huge mistake, because what it leads to is these cycles where everybody's trying to out extreme each other. And it's all about who has the most extreme sounding ideas. And it works in a sense because sometimes radical ideas are very extreme by comparison to the prevailing norms of society. In fact, I would argue that it's often quite extreme by comparison to those norms. But the radical perspective is not radical because it's extreme. It's just that taking a foundational look at the problems leads one to a more extreme view of the circumstances, to a more extreme view of what must be done to change things. But it is not that extreme views in and of themselves are powerful or more correct or make you more of a radical. It's not more radical to, I'll give an example. I'll ground this a little bit. Okay. We've got these people that think it's more radical to want to just, mass murder the bourgeois. And I hope that doesn't get me demonetized, but, to just go on an all out, extermination campaign of the capitalist class. However, historically, that was a very contentious idea, like whether we should be repeating the mistakes of the Jacobins, whether we should be ourselves trying to orient around, the logic of a guillotine. Are we, in one breath, we're saying we're going to abolish the death penalty. And in the next breath, we're saying we're going to line up, hundreds of thousands of people and just, put them against the wall and kill them. Like that's not a foregone conclusion. It's only a foregone conclusion if you've confused radicalism with being extreme. Oh yeah, I have the most extreme anti-capitalist perspective, and having the most extreme anti-capitalist perspective means that I want to massacre anybody that owns a business. And it's like, no. That doesn't mean you have a more radical perspective. In fact, it might suggest you have a less radical perspective because you've misunderstood what the foundations of the problem are. The foundations of the problem are not a bunch of individuals in the capitalist class. The individuals in the capitalist class are acting as per the mechanical structure of the capitalist society that they are embedded in. If you just got rid of Jeff Bezos, you'd have a new Jeff Bezos tomorrow. If you got rid of Elon Musk, you'd have a new Elon Musk tomorrow. The problem is the structure of the capitalist system, not the individuals themselves. And I'm not trying to say that they are perhaps not disdainful and that they would not themselves become enemies were some revolutionary process to take place, but it is not radical to say that you think the solution to the problem of the bourgeoisie is just to gulag them, right? Is to just kill them all with a firing squad or something. That only sounds radical when you've confused radicalism for being extreme, okay? And so this also leads to this sort of like more radical than thou posturing that takes place, where it's all about, how extreme can you sound, and, making the other person out to be insufficiently extreme in their viewpoints. And they confuse this extremity with militancy. But actual effective, change in society may entail all kinds of things that really aren't that extreme. Helping people who are in need is not, it doesn't sound extreme when compared to a guy that says he wants to go, burn down the Federal Reserve. The helping people is actually a way more radical, way more revolutionary, way more militant act than the former, even though it may seem otherwise because, oh my God, fire's involved and a building got destroyed and so on. But would it really change the structure of anything in the process? Not that I would condemn it were it to take place, but like, does that act actually get us any closer to the goal? Because for me, that's what actual radicalness is. That's what actual revolutionary action is. Does it get us closer to the goal? If it doesn't get us closer to the goal, then I don't really see it as being radical. I don't see it as being revolutionary, even if it sounds really extreme. It's not. And I think that we make this mistake at our peril. And once again, I think a big reason why we make this mistake is because all a lot of people have in this era and in the era of the internet is that extreme viewpoint. It just, the nature of these social platforms, it encourages us to get into arguments and to compare ourselves to one another and to try to create these little radical cliques where, we've got the in group and the out group, and the in group, they agree with me on every single little tiny detail, but it's like 5 people, right? And, you exclude anybody who questions the ideas, it almost becomes like a bunch of miniature cults. No offense intended to any of you. I'm sure this is indicating even a lot of people in my own audience, but it's an extremely, it promotes an insular approach to everything. And might I add, it translates extremely badly into the real world. Because whereas a lot of people have been spending all of their time trying to have a contest of who's most extreme on Twitter, when you get out into the real world and start talking with people, you realize that that's not really appealing to them. They're not, a lot of them aren't involved in your weird game on Twitter where you want to seem super extreme and have like a really edgy sounding title in your bio or some really edgy profile picture. That doesn't matter to most people. And that isn't impressive to most people. That isn't for them a solution to any of their problems. That only appears to be radical to people in these spaces because that's all they've got. And so they're constantly thinking that if they just find some new idea, if they just prescribe to some new ideology, if they just, espouse some new view, that itself is an act of power, that makes them powerful. And moreover, it's as if they think that act of taking on the label, taking on the ideology, itself makes the ideology happen. That like advocating for it or labeling oneself as it brings it into existence. And this actually is almost exactly what the critique of idealism was back in, the 1800s, where we get this classic split between, idealism and materialism and quote unquote scientific socialism as opposed to utopian socialism. A big part of those two splits, as Engels laid them out, and everybody knows I got my beef with Engels, but the big part of those splits was that the idealists thought that all you had to do was conjure better ideas, that you just had to convince more people, and that if you held the right ideas and enough people held the right ideas, things would change. But that is wrong, just flat out. That's wrong. That's part of the process. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say you shouldn't try to convince people to have better ideas and that you should not spend time trying to make sure your ideas accord to reality. You absolutely should. But that is the key, that your ideas should accord to reality and that they actually materialize in some concrete actions to change the world, to build something that will transform the world outside of yourself, and that those ideas, when they perpetuate, will tend people toward further action. That's the key, okay? Just having the right ideas is not enough. Those ideas need to perpetuate themselves, and when they perpetuate themselves, they need to create more and more people who are motivated to act by way of those ideas. But people, I think, a lot of people, especially online, but it's not only online, they confuse this whole process, right? They don't understand that part of the process. It is as if they think that holding the ideas is the radical act. And it is, highly about a form of sort of, self-soothing, like convincing yourself, you're doing it right. So that's enough. You got the right ideas. That's enough. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not. It's essentially just aesthetics. It's aestheticism. You're focused on aesthetics. You're basing your entire life around having an aesthetic of radicalism in place of action. And I hope anybody who is feeling called out right now recognizes that I'm not really blaming you. It's not like your fault. I think this is occurring in to such an enormous degree because of the environment we're embedded in, because of that feeling of powerlessness, because of the fact that we spend so much of our time in these online spaces where we are not able to really cultivate power in that sense. And so it leads people to this, ideology shopping where they're changing their ideologies all the time. And, they're unmoored. They lack a foundation, and they spend very little time, really meditating on how their worldview is meant to do something, what is their actual responsibility to act afterwards, and in what way can they act? Now, for my own part, I'll just say, obviously, here I am on the internet, right? And here I am trying to spread my viewpoint. So it's not as if, once again, I believe that spreading ideas is insufficient. And I label myself an anarchist. And I've said before that I think calling myself an anarchist in conversations can be a tool, a valuable tool in helping people radicalize. But it is not, I am not radical for calling myself anarchist on my Twitter profile unless I do something to actually spread those ideas and to get people to act. And on this YouTube channel, I hope any of you will notice that I spend a lot of time trying to get people to act and giving them avenues to act and giving them theoretical frameworks which always encourage them to act. I want all of you in my audience to understand that that is an extremely important component of this, that you act, that you do something in the world. And, there's a million reasons why that's going to be hard. Okay. And it's also not to say that you all need to do the exact same thing. Obviously we're all not going to do the exact same thing. We're going to do the things that we are inclined to do and that we're good at. And you should do the things you're inclined to do and the things you're good at. But I want you to ask, whatever ideology it is that you hold, is it just an aesthetic, or do you believe that it should be operative in the world? Because if it's the latter, you have some responsibility to act to bring that about. And I know every single time I say this, once again, I know people might feel like I'm calling you out, but every single time I say this, the comments get flooded with, well, tell me what to do. I'm in this circumstance and that circumstance. And once again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with asking that question. I develop work precisely to answer that question, and I will continue to do so, and especially these next big video essays. But I just want to encourage you to think on the question yourself, to read and learn more, to read about the history of struggle, to look at the things that other people are doing, to think about your theoretical foundations, think about your beliefs and the things you hold. What are those radical ideas that you hold? And then try to just do some work thinking of the answer yourself. Okay? Because I can't have the answer for everybody. All I can tell you is vague generalities. I can tell you general things you need to do, but only you within your circumstance are going to know exactly what it is that you are good at. What are your skills? What are your talents? What are your strengths? And how can you act within those circumstances? Because I want to encourage everybody who is watching not to confuse aesthetics as radicalism. And at the same time, I want to say that if you are not yet acting, I'm not like condemning you. I'm not saying that you're a bad person or something, or that you're like a fake anarchist or something like that. That's not what I'm trying to say. Okay. I'm not saying that you're a fake anarchist. But what I am saying is you should introspect a little bit. If that's all that you're doing, if that's all that that your engagement is that sort of online persona, that sort of performance of radicalism, that all you're offering is an appeal to extremity, and ask yourself why. Ask yourself why that's happening, and ask yourself whether that's really helping anybody, or whether that is egoistic, whether that's an act that is actually just trying to, it's kind of an act of self-aggrandizement. Because I think people really need to ask themselves that question. I think it's really important for people to introspect on that and to ask what they can actually do in the world to change the world for the better. Because that's what this all really comes down to. Okay? We're trying to transform the world. It is not enough for us to all sit around and have a really great discussion about radical things and like how capitalism works and how colonialism works. Work to dismantle capitalism. Work to dismantle colonialism. Act. Create something that is a threat to this power structure. Something that is actually a threat to this power structure. So, there you go. I think that's the ramble. Okay. I've said this to a few other people before, and maybe there were a few other points that I emphasized, but that's the long and short of it. And this is a thing that's bugged me for years. Okay. So hopefully I was, articulate, mixed in with my indignant there, but that's the video. Hopefully I didn't piss off too many people. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, go click like below. If you disliked it, go click dislike below. If you are interested in more kinds of videos like this, more videos of me rambling, or those big long video essays that I just discussed, please click subscribe, especially if this is like the second or third time that you've had one of these videos recommended to you and you've watched all the way to this point in the video. Subscribe to my channel. It helps me out. Okay. Also, go comment down below. Tell me what you think. Okay. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And so on. Go for it. Lastly, if you've lasted this long, if you're still here in this video, then you should go become a patron for any amount. I have different tiers, $2, $5, $7, $20. You can help this channel at a variety of different pay scales, and they are all helpful to me. So go over to my Patreon at patreon.com/Anark, ANARK, and go become a patron. That would be incredibly helpful. Anyway, that's the video, everybody. I'll see you next week.